Hi, and welcome to People First, a Lotus People podcast. In a world that's constantly evolving, this podcast exists to inspire people centric leaders to navigate through these ever changing times. We're excited to share stories, build a community, and learn from one another. We're your hosts, Sophie Thomas and Sinead Connolly, and we run award winning recruitment agency, Lotus People. Having been in the recruitment industry for 12 plus years, we've had the privilege of engaging with some incredible organisations and leaders. And we didn't want to keep these insights to ourselves. So we're bringing you inside some of these discussions, focusing on the most prevalent topics in the market right now. Join us as we dive deep into the heart of leadership, exploring the challenges and opportunities shaping today's workplace. You can expect candid conversations, practical advice, and inspiring stories from leaders who are making a real difference. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the People First community.
Alrighty, we are officially live. Welcome, Larissa. Hi, Sophie.
Hi. So, Larissa, welcome to People First, a Lotus People podcast. Obviously, it's lovely to have you here with us today. You recently joined us as a guest at our Future of Work event in Brisbane. And today we're just really excited to have you on the other side so that we can now pick your amazing brains. This podcast is all about kind of sharing nuggets of wisdom from great individuals like yourself. So to kick us off today, could you please provide our listeners with a brief overview of your current role?
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be asked to come on here and have a chat. So currently I am working at the Lottery Corporation as the culture and diversity lead. So I look after the entire strategy related to our diversity and inclusion portfolio, as well as our organisational culture strategy. So that includes employee listening, development of leaders and things like that. So a really, really interesting and exciting remit, especially in an organisation that is newly demerged from a bigger organisation. So kind of starting everything from the ground up, building out all of those kind of organisational development principles and things like that for our organisation.
Amazing. And what I loved so much about and we're obviously very grateful to have you on, so thank you for your time. And you did literally just tell us that you're going overseas this evening, so the fact that you're dedicating one of your hours in that absolute manic lead up to traveling overseas, we are very, very appreciative. So it's lovely to pick up the conversation. The last time that you and I spoke, when we caught up, you were talking about it really kind of stayed with me, just the sort of impact that however big the pot is and the pool is for the lottery, how that impacts then the team and the excitement. And when it gets up to this huge multi-million-dollar number, it can really sort of reverberate through the team and people get on board with it. And then the bigger it gets, if someone doesn't win, it actually, it shifts the energy. I love that. I just love the idea of that sort of impacting your day-to-day. What a special thing to be a part of.
Oh, it's amazing.
It is really fun and fantastic. And then you want someone to win, and then they win, and then you hear great stories about, just the reaction and all of those sorts of things. So it definitely creates an energy in the organisation.
And it makes so much sense that as a business that has such a drastic impact on people's lives, that you would channel that internally and look at being a people-centric business and really make sure that you are sort of looking after and I guess being mindful of the people within the business, as well as all of the people that you obviously positively impact outside of it. So let's kick us off. I guess understanding that in context for our listeners is fantastic. I think what we would love to know, and it's obviously the topic of leadership and all of this at the moment is just absolutely crucial and huge in these crazy times we're living in. But we'd love to know from your experience what you think makes a strong people leader.
Yeah, sure. So I've obviously worked, and before working in this role, I've kind of spent 15 plus years working as a business partner. So I've worked with a lot of leaders, good and bad. But I think that when I reflect on that and when I look at kind of the great leaders in different organizations, it really is being able to balance being a human and leading from the heart and, genuinely caring about your people, having a genuine curiosity about their lives and their ambitions and where they want to go and what they want to do with their work, but equally what's happening in their life at any point in time. But balancing that with also knowing how to push them, how to challenge them to their limit, right? So, and I think it's so nuanced, and it's for every different person and for every different. I mean, leadership is hard, but for every different person on any different day, there's going to be a different point. So I think that emotional intelligence of knowing what that is for different people, you know, I think also being vulnerable. I think the best leaders I've had are the ones that can challenge you, but also can be challenged, and are willing to create that really safe environment within their teams that they can have robust conversations that are built on trust, which comes from having those relationships, having that genuine connection with your people. But once you've got that trust, then you can challenge respectfully, and people are willing to hear it rather than feeling, you know, concerned about, you know, I think you can't have one without the other, right? Either way. So if you've got those leaders that think they're pushing and challenging you but don't have the connection, they're not going to get the best out of you because they create fear. And then if you've got the people that are, which is very often the case, because I do think most people leaders genuinely care about their people, but are so worried about damaging the relationship by pushing them or challenging them or giving them really constructive feedback, that they're still also not getting the best out of them. So, you know, I think it really is that balance of those two competing skill sets.
For sure. And sorry, Sophie.
No, that's right. I was going to say, I think you raised a really good point. And I think something that just came to mind as you were talking about how to balance that kind of being a human, that kind of that friendship, effectively, that relationship they're building with these people about the kind of wanting to know about their own life, but equally, how can they challenge them at work? I think we're in a really interesting place at the moment. And I think it's, in my opinion, very hard to be a leader when you've got topics like burnout being so kind of out there at the moment. And I think as a leader, it's hard because, yes, you want to push your team to be productive and you want to challenge them, but also everyone's quite different. And we even talk about this internally. Like, I work a lot. I love working and I'm very passionate about what I do. And I have never got to the point of burnout. But I'm really conscious of actually not everyone works as much as I do, and not everyone's able to. And I think as a leader, like, how do you balance that, I guess, is in terms of understanding how you challenge some people, because look, some people's resilience is much higher than others. And as a leader, I guess, what do you think leaders can be doing to really be identifying different people's levels of productivities, like how they cope in those kind of stressful times? Like, what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, I think that when you come at it from a coaching perspective, because often people actually don't know themselves well enough, right? So, and I reflect on, you know, my own career, and obviously when you're kind of in your 20s and you don't really think about it, you don't really know yourself, and we all kind of evolve at different rates of having that true self-awareness. And I think that it's hard for a leader to know. You can't kind of ask the question if the people themselves don't know. So I think being able to kind of be curious and ask questions and get people to self-reflect, and then get to a point where they know their edge as well, and they can say, you know what, like, for now, because I mean, I've been there as well, where, you know, work is 100% of the time, and then you're trying to do other layer things in over the top, and there comes to a point where you've got to say, actually, I can't do this anymore. But I don't think a leader can ever know that if the person they're leading doesn't know it either. So, I mean, definitely there are signs, right? The better you know people, the more you know when they're having an off day or if something's just not right. But I think also giving them permission to say, look, what's your capacity? Because, and that's something that we're really good at where I work, and certainly in my team, is that it's always about, okay, we are all very ambitious and want to achieve a lot of things and deliver a lot of things, but let's just hold for a minute and stop and be realistic about what we're putting on that list, because it's not sustainable, right? So, and I think that in this environment where there is so much change happening in the world, in workplaces, it's not just the work that is taking up people's time. It's that cognitive load of, especially, you know, difficult economic times, and so the financial stress, the, you know, is AI going to take my job? Is there security? You know, and you know, we hear a lot of organisations are downsizing and all of those sorts of things. So that all that sort of stuff plays a part in people's lives, let alone what's happening in their personal lives. So maintaining that curiosity and helping people build their own kind of understanding, I think, of themselves, and then giving them the permission to say, okay, I'm putting my hand up because I've got too much on and I can't cope with it, before it gets to the point of burnout.
And I think to your point, Sophie, everyone has such different degrees of what they can take on. People work at my partner is the slowest man in the world, and he honestly, for the work he does and for the brain he has, it is completely suited. He's the absolute yin to my yang, or yang to my yin even. But if I put him in our office in recruitment for a day, he'd just like, his head would spin from how fast we all move. And so we are all completely different beings and operate at different paces. But I think you're right. I think it starts with that self-awareness and self-understanding, and then from there, obviously working with individuals to sort of help them see how they work. And the closer you are to people and the more exposure you have to them, then of course you do, as you say, you do start to sort of see when people are off. But it's such a good point, Soph, and I think it's one of those things where, like you, for example, like I don't think I've ever met anyone who has as much of an output as you do. Like you work like an absolute trooper. And I think, Larissa, to your point, I've been so guilty over the years, and all my leadership team know this, that I will want to put, if we're in a quarterly planning day, I will want to put 800 things on that to-do list and that action plan, and I'll always have things taken off me and people saying, you don't need that, and you can't have that, and we can't do this. And that sort of ability from leaders to sort of create a culture of it, the ability to sort of feedback and to really push back, I suppose, and challenge in those situations is really important, and will probably help prevent burnout within, I guess, situations where it doesn't need to happen.
Sorry, it froze then.
Yeah, I feel like we got an echo there.
Yeah. But no, I completely agree. And I think, obviously, we've spoken a lot about the fact that the world of work is constantly evolving, and it is massively. And I think kind of on to our next question really is, what skills do you think maybe a leader of tomorrow would need to have to be successful?
I think agility is number one, right? So, you know, we've talked about things changing, but I do actually think that with the evolution of AI, we are really at a very interesting point in the world of work, because it is suddenly something that is disrupting, you know, the knowledge worker, which is not something we've had as much as other industries have been impacted. And I think being able to pivot and adapt to things as they change, but being able to also bring people on that journey as well. So, you know, having the resilience and building the resilience in your team, genuine growth mindset, because things are not going to be the way they were yesterday, or, you know, even, I mean, we already see it with people who are trying to lead like a pre-COVID leader, and not lead like a post-COVID leader, when actually everything has changed, and we're not putting that genie back in the bottle, it's done. And so I think that that's going to continue. So you kind of need to be okay with letting things go and learning how to lead differently. So, I mean, we think about, especially, you know, you've got a lot of senior executives who, when they have been successful and grown up through different organizations and built their careers, leadership looked very different. And the most successful people at those levels are the people that change their leadership style and realize that it's a moment in time, and it is a constantly fluid thing. So I think that having that growth mindset and curiosity, and being able to adapt to change. And I also think being tech savvy, I think being on top of things and not assuming it's not going to impact you, but actually, okay, let's let's take this thing on board and see how we can make it work for us and how it's going to impact us. I think those are probably the key traits that we definitely need. And also, I mean, I think that not taking away from what I think a strong leader is in terms of that human-centered leadership. I think that's an expectation with younger generations. I think that has really shifted. We've moved away from that hierarchical, power-led kind of situation, thankfully, even though many leaders still might try to lead like that, or manage like that, I should say. But I think that being human-centered is not going to go away.
Yeah, completely agree. And that's been a massive shift, and we've seen it. We're obviously in the eye of the storm of the bird's eye view we get to have of so many organizations, and that human-centric approach. It's, as you said, it's what candidates are demanding. They aren't sort of we're not in a world where it's a nice to have. I know this leader is a great leader, you're lucky to have them. People are actually demanding it, and it is a real must. And I suppose to your point around agility, I think it is such a good point, as so many things are changing. In your experience working in different industries, do you find that is something that comes naturally to leaders, or do you feel like that it's still a big growth area for the leaders out there in general, I suppose?
I think it definitely is still a growth area. I think if people have worked in industries that do constantly change, they've kind of built that muscle. But it is interesting because I have hopped around into different industries, many of which have been disrupted, and then hopping back into something that hasn't been disrupted. It's those leaders find it much harder when something comes at them to change. So I don't think it comes naturally to anybody. I think human nature is for us to be safe and feel safe, and I think that things shifting discombobulates people a little bit. And so I don't think it necessarily comes naturally. I'm sure some people are more adaptable, some people are less adaptable by their nature. But I think it is really interesting working in, because I've worked in telco where the whole industry was completely disrupted by NBN, and that is a massive shift to get people to go, we've done this for 20 years and now we're doing something different, and I don't understand why. But I think that the key thing is sharing and talking about it, right? So leaders that are willing to communicate and say, we don't exactly know where this is going, but we're doing our best and we're going to keep you informed. I think that actually helps them as leaders as well, because they're kind of all in it together, as opposed to trying to pretend they're steering the ship when they have no idea what they're doing. Not that you want them to say they've got no idea what they're doing, but a level of vulnerability around the fact that, things are shifting and changing, and we're adapting as best we can. And it's new for all of us, So, yeah.
And I think that ties in with the authentic leadership piece as well, doesn't it? Having that vulnerability, and that's a really fine line between sort of saying, look, this is where we're at. This is sort of all cards on table, but then also not tipping too far into, I have no idea what's going on. It's all falling apart. There's definitely a fine line to tread there.
Yeah. a little bit of a duck, I suppose, having some sense of calm. But I think also people are not stupid, right? We're all adults in the workforce, and I think that very often leaders think they don't want to tell someone something, but people know, and people can read the tea leaves, and people know when things are not working, or if something's they're in the business and they understand the impacts of different things. So I think the most important thing with communication is treating everyone like adults and assuming that they're going to do the best with the information, and not assume that because of the one person who might do the wrong thing with some information, that you shouldn't share. So I do think that that's still missing, and that's still a real growth area for leaders, is actually, and I'm probably talking about more executive leaders, but in most organisations, you see that they've got information, but they want to control everything so much instead of recognising that they're working with a bunch of adults. Yeah,
humans and adults. I like that approach, it's exactly the case, right? And I think in thinking back on, sorry, Soph, did I cut you off?
No, that's right. I was going to say, what I was going to say is, I think everything you're saying is also that kind of clarity and transparency with communication from leaders. I think that's something I've always personally really valued. But I think a lot of people, when they're in a role and they're thinking about who they want their leader to be and who they're looking up to, that trust piece is really important. But that is built with the communication and the relationship and that transparency. And I think if I think about my leaders' styles and things like that, but if that clarity is there and everybody knows what they're doing, you naturally feel safer, more bought in, more, I suppose, understanding of what the kind of commercial aspect of the business is, or what their role is, or what the expectations is of that. And I think it makes such a big difference. But that starts from communication. And I think a lot of the time, it kind of gets not forgotten about, but just the way you communicate sometimes can change everything on somebody's perspective.
And I think that's the other piece with knowing, like, because some people, like, it's all perception, right? So leaders might think they're communicating, but if they don't clarify with their people whether they feel informed, there can be a bit of a mixed message there, I think, as well, because people might feel like there's more, but I think that open discussion, right, back and forth, rather than just top down messaging, but asking, what else do you want to know? What are the ask me anything? What are the questions that are keeping you up at night, and those sorts of things? Because if you don't ask, you don't really know, and you're putting your own assumptions out there.
And we've been guilty of that ourselves. I mean, I know even at Lotus, we've had great leadership planning sessions or meetings where we've gone, amazing, I've never felt more on top of things. We know exactly where we're going in the strategy. And then a few months later, the team will go, I feel like there's been a lot of change. What's going on? Like some basic questions haven't been answered. And that's learning as well. I think it's so important to filter that all the way through the business. And to your point, Larissa, having that open feedback and town hall, or ask me anything, or what do you want to know? Because I think no matter the size of the business, it's something that people can get wrong. And yet, to your earlier point about safety and people feeling like they know that they know their place and that there's security, all that can often come down to is communication and how things are being messaged or spoken about.
Absolutely.
But we can all, sorry.
No, that's all right. I was going to say, I think in terms of even thinking about being a leader and kind of hardest lessons, like everyone has to learn, right, as they're on their journey to becoming a people leader. And even we spoke about this earlier in terms of being a leader and what that means and what the difference is between a manager and a leader, and is a leader wearing a crown. I guess everyone has to go through lots of hard lessons. For you personally, what's been the hardest lesson that you've had to learn as a people leader?
I think it does change over time, because I think that, when you first become a leader, one of the things I still reflect on when I first became a people leader, and it's that just letting go and letting people do things the way they want to do it and deliver it the way they want to deliver it. And it's not going to be the same as the way you would do it, but also that's okay. So I think that, when you first start leadership, it's about knowing when to provide guidance and autonomy, and knowing when you're kind of overstepping and trying to control things. So that's probably a key one. I think that asking the right questions is probably key, because again, as humans, we just fill in the gaps and we just assume that other people hear what we're intending when they may have heard something else. So I think that every person you lead helps you grow as a leader, and every experience, whether you've made mistakes or not, are those things that help you become better. So I think asking the right questions to understand where they're at personally, do they understand what did they get from that messaging that I've given you? Do you know the expectations? Do you know where are things at? Some people are not as good at communicating back, and if you're not really clear on that, it's really about getting that messaging right. So curiosity and really that coaching mindset, I think, is drawing things out of people so that you can understand what's going on in their head, is probably I think probably one of the hardest things to learn how to do naturally. Some people are great at it naturally, but as humans, we do tend to just fill in the blanks with our brains.
Yeah, and you're so right. Like, I think naturally the way that you ask a question, somebody else doesn't necessarily take it as how you've asked it. And I think sometimes, again, that clarity, like, it's such a key word, I think, throughout leadership in so many different facets. But I do think naturally that if we are trying to articulate something, sometimes we need to just even reconfirm that is, this is what my question was. What's your thoughts on that? And maybe sometimes you need to ask it in a different way. But I think that really helps people understand what it is you're trying to get to, and actually, where you might be able to support. So, really valid.
And I think,
I guess,
I was going to say, I think something as well that so many businesses, I don't think any business would put their hand up and say, we nail our leadership. Every single leader is receiving the highest engagement survey scores. Like, everyone is doing bloody brilliantly. Like, it's obviously a big piece in every business and a huge piece of focus, and it ties in, of course, with the broader people strategy and I guess the overall strategy of the business. But I guess I'm curious to know what, from your experience in lots of different industries and businesses, what do you think businesses can be doing better when it does come to their people initiatives and their employee engagement?
So many things. But ultimately, it all comes down to the culture, and it's still a challenge for people, for organisations, to invest and understand the importance of culture, and that leadership impacts culture, and that different initiatives impact culture, but also the decisions you're making that are not people initiatives, but are, decisions about approval levels and how hard it is to get something done around here, or what is this process over here, and what are my workload, and how do I collaborate with people? All of those things impact the culture. And I think that for there to be a real, I think this is, it blows my mind that 20 years on, it's still, we're not competing for space at the table, thankfully. But I do still think that there's a mindset of that people stuff is nice and fluffy and good to do, or we need to do this diversity stuff because it ticks the box, as opposed to really understanding the business impact of doing it and of not doing it. So we talked earlier about expectations of people changing. I think, and I'd be really interested to hear your insights, but the expectations of our employees, of our shareholders, of our customers, is that we are active in the spaces of ESG and diversity, and that we have a good culture, because those people understand the impact that then has financially and on business results. So I think really understanding all of the impacts on culture and driving initiatives that align to what you want. I think that how we lead it at the Lottery Corporation is going to be really different to how other organisations lead, and that's okay.
Yeah,
it's got to be suited to how you want your organisation to operate, how your organisation engages with the community and with customers, and what your purpose is, and all of those sorts of things. So there's definitely going to be other organisations that might look at our leadership style and say, oh, that's not going to work here, and that's fine. So it's kind of really try not to do what everyone else is doing, but understand what you want to achieve and what you want your business to stand for, and making sure that all the strategies, people strategies and business strategies, line up to that, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a couple of things that I took from that as well was, even if I look at it from, I guess, a recruitment perspective, there's many candidates that I speak to, especially at that senior end, where they are leaving organizations because they're being frustrated by process taking too long to be signed off, or maybe not being given ownership because they're being micromanaged, or executive leaders taking too much control and they're not allowed to have that ownership of a function. And that can be super frustrating. But I think on the other point is, since COVID, we've definitely noticed a big uptake in kind of people reaching out in terms of having that epiphany moment of what do I want to be doing? What am I looking for in my next role? And especially where I guess things like ESG, diversity and inclusion, like people want to work for organizations that are either providing kind of real solutions to real world problems, or they want to work for a business where they can really connect to, whether that's kind of part of a community where they know they're giving good back. Or I think, look, we know as people in this space that good businesses are run through their people, and their people look after their customers. But I do definitely, obviously, when we spoke about this earlier, Sinead, is a lot of the time that there's so much of a focus on kind of shareholders and P&L and things like that. And just taking a step back and going, if we look after our people look after our business. But it isn't doing it as a tick box. It's just being a bloody good human and doing the right thing sometimes that just should be taken much bigger.
It is interesting how much it's shifted, isn't it? And I think that probably hasn't resonated enough with organizations in understanding what that means. And I think that, I would be interested in what your experience is, but that perspective that leaders might not, feel like, why is the employee running the show? Why are we doing everything that they want when we're like, we should dictate how it comes across, and we should dictate what they get, and all of those sorts of things. So it's a really interesting dynamic that seems to have shifted quite a bit in the last few years. And I do think the leaders that are struggling are those that are not on board with it. I mean, flexibility is obviously always a hot topic.
Yeah.
But I know that there are still organizations saying come in 5 days a week, and people are saying, you know what, I value my life more, and I can find something that's going to work better for me. So I'd be interested to hear what you think the balance is of leaders and organizations taking on board all of those things and shifting to suit what the expectations are versus kind of sticking to their guns about something that's not necessarily in line with expectations.
Yeah, I think it's a real fine line, because there's definitely a balance, like especially when I've recruited a number of CPO level roles recently, and people want to work for organizations where they have got clarity over their strategic direction. Like that is absolutely there. But I think people also want that kind of opportunity where they have got ownership and they can be bringing great initiatives and things like that. And I think one of the biggest, like I said, was resistance to change, I think has been a frustration for a lot of people in the market. There are obviously a lot of people who have gone through that epiphany moment during COVID where they've probably just realized what's important to them and what's not. And I think when you're talking about flexibility and hybrid working, I actually had a client of mine who I've worked extensively with over the last about 18 months. And they are a US owned organization, and they obviously operate in Brisbane for their APAC region. And when I've recruited for them, they typically have a couple of days a week in the office, and it works really well across APAC. But in the US, they have really struggled with doing a hybrid working model, and they have found that they've decided that they want to bring people back in 4 days a week. And I think even understanding the difference of like different kind of cultures and environments and locations and geographies and how that all impacts within kind of global organizations, that's been something quite interesting, because in APAC it's worked really well 2 days a week, and the culture they've created here has worked with that hybrid working model. But in the US it's not working, so they're kind of now going, maybe we need to roll it out globally. So even looking at it from those different things, it's been interesting to see the adaptation. But when the HR director gave me a call and said, what's your thoughts? My immediate reaction was that we're in a market at the moment where talent pipelines are tight. There's obviously lots of challenges at the moment. And with that, from my perspective, the more days that you have people in the office, the smaller that talent pool is going to be. Like I personally would travel much further 2 days a week than I would doing it 4 days a week. I've got kids and I've got to do drop-offs and pickups. And when you can manage lifestyle a couple of days a week in an office, it means that you can have better work-life balance. But I think you're also reducing your talent pool so much more. And for any business, like we say, your people are everything. And I think that's the challenge at the moment is the employees can't be running the business because you have got the business, but as long as you've got the right strategic direction and everyone's engaged and things like that, working together in unity, I think that's what creates a really successful business.
I completely
and
agree.
Also understanding those micro cultures. I think that you talk about even it's about treating people again like adults and giving them autonomy over their work. And we know from our organisation that there are certain parts of the business who just, they want to come in more. They're very outgoing and they want to talk to people and be there, and they thrive on that. And then there are other parts of the business that don't want that. And it's also being okay that we can't necessarily have a one-size-fits-all approach, because there are nuances between the kind of work people do, where their teams are located. I mean, there's nothing worse than coming into an office and sitting on Teams calls with someone interstate all day. You kind of think, what's the point? Especially for people that travel, long distances. And we see that in the bigger cities, less so in Brisbane, I think, because it's often more commutable. But you've got to have a purpose to come in rather than just being dictated to. And I think that taking the autonomy away when it's been given to you through COVID is probably a harder pill to swallow for some people.
I think also when you're talking about the different, and I was just thinking the differences with these kind of micro markets even. I even think of one business having one policy to say, right, we're 2 days a week in the office. Like you might have a sales and marketing team who actually love being in the office and they want to be in 5 days a week or even 4 days a week. And on the flip side, your finance and IT teams might go, oh, I'm a bit more introverted. I don't want to be around people as much. Maybe I preserve my energy better in particular settings. Like having that approach where we're really understanding our people and what works for them. And again, you might have someone who's a mum and they need a bit more flexibility, or you might have someone who just likes being in the office. Like everyone is different. And I think that's the uniqueness of trying to create something. And I still think it's hard. Like we're still talking about it now, 3-4 years later. And I don't think anyone's really got the answer. It's everyone's trying their hardest to make something work. But some definitely doing things better than others. But very interesting.
And I think as well, what I've seen over the last probably 12 months or so is that people sort of landed on what they landed on in terms of hybrid flexibility, etc., work from home. And then the market got really tough. And I think that's when businesses have started to sort of pull people back in. And it's then the conversation of flexibility versus productivity, and also the conversation around learning and development as well, and exposure and coaching. And so you could have 8 different hats on, and we could probably have a whole other podcast talking about this topic. It's a tricky one, and it is obviously so people centric, but at the same time, that, as you both said, there's no clear answer. I don't think it's what works for each team and each business as well.
I think that on to the next question. So we've obviously spoken about lots of different things today, specifically around leadership, but what's one thing that maybe we haven't covered today that you feel very passionately about in this space?
Oh, look, I think leadership is so hard. And I think I still, and this is probably a conversation that will go on until the day I die, but I think that organizations are still promoting people in their technical space and expecting them to be doing the work and leading the people. And I think that pushes people into a situation where they actually prioritize doing the work, and then less time is spent on leading the people. So I haven't actually ever worked in an organisation where they've got it right. And obviously I understand budgets and pressures and things like that. But I think that there's not enough priority given to the leadership and the importance and the time that is taken to really be a good leader. And if you have an organisation, my dream organisation, where every leader is pretty much, a lot of what their role entails is just leadership and getting delivery through their people and helping them to balance that, because it is always kind of an add-on, right? And people are trying to do it on top of a very busy day job. And that's when it gets pushed to the side and deprioritized. And I mean, we even know when it becomes performance review periods, having those really quality conversations about people's career and their development. And we know that people struggle to find the time to have the right conversations because they've still got all of their other things to do. So I think if you could create space, it's about creating space for leadership. And I think that if organizations can kind of recognize that and create a little bit more space for leadership and structure their businesses, because the design of the organization is actually really imperative. And often these initiatives all kind of sit separately and are not strung together well enough. So I think if your organization is designed in line with the culture that you want to create, the processes are designed in line with that, leadership is designed in line with that, then you're going to get the best culture for your organization, and therefore you're going to get the best results.
Yeah.
So I think if there's, I mean, it's always a challenge.
Yeah, I was going to add, even funny enough, when you were talking about people having it as kind of part of their role in there, I think one of the things that we're seeing a lot in the market at the moment, especially speaking to people and culture leaders, even ER managers, there definitely feels like there's been a rise for employee relations cases. And a lot of the time, the conversations that we're having is that people are being promoted. So they're currently very technically able, they're doing a great job, and they're being promoted into these leadership roles, but they're still doing their day job. And I guess, but aren't necessarily having the kind of leadership management training. And from there, obviously, we're seeing, I guess, from my perspective, a bit of a gap in that kind of L&D space, where people aren't putting enough investment into their people. So they're then getting this backlash of ER cases. What would you say to those types of organizations? Like if you're looking at it from that lens, because I know obviously it's prevalent out there at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is always a balance, and we struggle with this as well in terms of we have great leadership programs, but it's people having the capacity to engage in those programs and get the most out of them, and then being able to put those practices in place. So I think again, it's about how do you create space? How do you really think about what's important in the long run? We have a tendency to be so short-term focused that we won't say, okay, I'm going to actually let everyone have half a day every week to develop, because I know that this is the capability we need to build for 5 years down the track. But creating any sort of capacity allows people to develop in the right way, because when you don't have capacity and you might have a program you can attend, your head's not in the right space because you're thinking about all the other things you need to do. I think the challenge is also the way COVID has, it's fantastic because people can access more development. You can jump on webinars, you can do things, but it's very hard for people to stay focused in those and not be distracted by doing something else. So it's how do you create a program that is actually going to be engaging enough and give the learning that's going to actually resonate and not just be another thing they attended but totally forgot about, a little bit later as well. So, and always when budgets are tight, L&D is one of the lines they like to cut. So I think it really comes back to that conversation about what is the culture you want to create and how important is that culture to the success of your organization, and therefore what are the right things to invest in, and is there another line item in the budget that is actually not going to get the right return, as opposed to something that's going to build capability for the future and create a more sustainable organization.
Yeah, I love that. I think that we probably all put our hand up and say we've been on some sort of training course over the years and can't really remember much of it. But again, you are probably really right. Like I know there's definitely been things that I've been on, and in the back of my mind, I've also had other things going on, whether that's work, whether that's personal. It's you want to be at that time where you are going through those trainings where even you're fully invested into it, right? But I guess responsibility is on both, because actually, if we're investing as a company, you want to make sure that your teams or whoever's doing the kind of training or development initiatives, that they're actually going to be fully present and they're going to be taken on board, because I think a lot of companies can waste a lot of money by putting people through these if they're not going to be able to utilize them, or if they're not going to be able to really engage in the content and then take it away. We always joke, I love listening to podcasts, and I'm quite curious about most things in life, so I like learning. But it's very easy to just listen and listen and listen. Actually, how often do we sit down and just even recollect what we've learned. I definitely have had to take that in with a bit of feedback to go, even the stuff that I learn, actually I need to do something with it. But yeah, definitely really useful.
And I think also with learning, I mean, we always put a focus on the courses and those sorts of things. And sure, if you're going to do those and prioritize those, if you can get people together in a room, I still think it's better than doing anything online. But there's so much learning that comes from experience, and creating those opportunities for people to experience and try new things. So I even don't think you have to necessarily invest the money, but sometimes it's about investing time. So if I'm a leader and I've got someone who I think is really key talent, how can I give them a piece of work to own that's going to really stretch them and grow them so that they can kind of build those skills by doing? Because I think that you learn so much more in those kind of instances. How can I have a leader connect with another leader in the organization who is doing something really well that they need to learn? So I do think there's also a myriad of opportunities to create learning without spending money on courses and different development series.
It's such a good point, because every leadership team will have such an array of perspectives and strengths and skills to sort of amalgamate them together and do that in-house learning. It just comes down to time capacity. And as you say, when budget is a constraint, then time surely can be a priority and can be something that everyone can invest in. So it's a really good point. And to what Sophie had mentioned around content, the two of us are absolutely obsessed with consuming everything from books and books, podcasts, audiobooks, articles, YouTubes, whatever we can get our hands on, we are listening or reading. Do you have, I guess, as a final question, there's been so much value in this, but I guess, do you have any books, any articles, anything, any form of media in particular that you would recommend that on the topic of leadership you found really useful?
Look, I am absolutely a bit of a podcast junkie myself. So, but I like to really listen to a lot of different things, and I'd like to read quite widely in terms of articles and different things. So, I always balance. I love, Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, Adam Grant. I listen to his podcast because I think it's always not based necessarily on leadership, but it's on life, and I do think life and leadership, even parenting and leadership, are so similar that you can kind of take lots of different nuggets from those sorts of things. So I do like to listen to those things, but also be aware of kind of the business side of things, HBR articles, kind of those things that resonate with me and what's happening more widely in the business arena. But definitely probably Adam Grant is the one that sets all the light bulbs off in my head more than anything. So his books but also his podcast, where you can get lots of little nuggets, I think.
I think he has a good newsletter as well. That's been come through. And the other two, I mean, I always whenever I do leadership training with the team, they'll laugh at me for how often I reference Simon Sinek and Brené Brown. Right. I put them together as and Adam Grant's a fantastic third, but they're just like the human-centric leaders and leading from a place of authenticity and vulnerability and being real rather than being a corporate robot, which is needed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, look, honestly, thank you so much for jumping on today. I'm well aware that we kept you longer than we had intended, but there was so value in that, so much good information, and I know everyone listening will take so much away from it as well. So a huge thank you from me.
A huge thank you from me. Honestly, it's just incredible, being able to hear your insights. And I think obviously everyone's got a different perspective of leadership. And I think that's one thing why we wanted to create this series, was to kind of hear it from different people and see what different companies are doing well. I think, it definitely shows in even your style. You're so passionate about it as an area. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.